It was a typical foggy morning in Annapolis, Maryland, when Elon Musk stepped onto the hallowed grounds of the United States Naval Academy. The sounds of marching boots and disciplined cadets filled the air, as if the weight of tradition could be felt in every corner of the campus. But as soon as Musk entered, the entire atmosphere shifted. The steady rhythm of military precision seemed to falter, if only for a moment, as cadets and officers alike looked on, unsure of what to make of the man who had reshaped industries, launched rockets and conquered electric cars. Now he stood in front of them, an icon of innovation and risk. The Naval Academy was built on centuries of tradition, its core values focused on discipline, honor, and unwavering commitment to the service of the nation. Here the future leaders of the U.S. Navy were forged, prepared for the intense demands of military life. But what could a Silicon Valley entrepreneur possibly offer this world? Would Elon Musk's vision for the future be able to fit within the boundaries of military tradition? Or would he disrupt everything? Musk strode confidently toward the administrative building, his unmistakable presence drawing curious glances from every direction. His casual attire, jeans and a black hoodie, stood in stark contrast to the crisp uniforms of the Academy's cadets. But despite the unconventional appearance, there was no mistaking the quiet authority that followed him. Those who had worked closely with Musk knew one thing: he was never one to shy away from a challenge. Inside, Musk met with the Academy's leadership, admirals, captains, and officers who had dedicated their lives to defending the nation. The room was filled with a quiet tension, as some of the military leaders were skeptical about Musk's intentions. Why would someone like him, a man known for his unconventional approach to business and technology, be interested in an institution so deeply rooted in tradition? "I've been thinking a lot about the future of warfare," Musk began, his voice calm but firm. "The way we think about defense and technology needs to evolve. The world is changing fast, and the military should lead the way, not follow." Few of the officers exchanged uncertain glances. They had heard about Musk's innovations with Tesla and SpaceX, but the idea of applying that kind of thinking to the Navy seemed almost radical. "Are you suggesting that we throw away tradition?" an admiral asked, his voice a mixture of curiosity and caution. "That we abandon what has worked for generations?" Musk's eyes gleamed with determination. "Not at all. But if we keep doing things the way we always have, we risk falling behind. The future of warfare is going to look very different. Artificial intelligence, autonomous vehicles, cyber capabilities. It's time to rethink how we train, how we operate, and most importantly, how we innovate." The room fell silent. As the weight of Musk's words hung in the air, some of the military leaders, although intrigued, remained cautious. They had spent their lives mastering a system built on structure and hierarchy. Could Musk's vision, so focused on cutting-edge technology and disruption, really work within this rigid framework? Before anyone could respond, Musk's voice broke the silence again, this time with a hint of a smile. "I'm not here to change everything. I'm here to start a conversation, to push the boundaries of what's possible. The Navy has the potential to lead in the next chapter of military history. Together we can make that happen." At that moment, a subtle shift occurred. Some of the officers, still skeptical, began to see the value in Musk's perspective. It was a rare opportunity, a chance to infuse the future of warfare with the innovation that had revolutionized other industries. As the meeting came to a close, Musk stood up, ready to leave, but not without a final remark that left a lingering question in the minds of everyone in the room. "What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?" Musk asked, his gaze sweeping across the room. "For me, it's the belief that there's always a better way. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?" Elon Musk wasn't one to waste time. After his brief meeting with the Naval Academy's leadership, he immediately began his exploration of the institution. As the cadets marched past, him in perfect unison, he couldn't help but admire their discipline. There was a sense of respect for tradition here that was palpable, something he had rarely encountered in the ever-changing world of tech. But as he walked deeper into the heart of the academy, he started to realize that beneath the surface There was something else, a stagnation of thought, a resistance to adapting to the future. Musk's first stop was the training center, where cadets were rigorously put through their paces in physical training. It was impressive, but as he watched the drills unfold, he noticed something. The training seemed old-fashioned. They were running drills designed for a different era, a time when physical endurance and basic hand-to-hand combat were the deciding factors in a battle. The world of warfare was changing, and Musk could see that these cadets weren't being taught to adapt to the new kind of threats. Cyber attacks, autonomous drones, and artificial intelligence were now as crucial as hand-to-hand combat. What happens when you have to fight a war where no one is physically present? Musk asked one of the instructors, a decorated Navy officer. The man looked at him, puzzled. "That's not something we focus on here," the officer replied, clearly uncomfortable with the question. "We prepare our cadets for the real world, challenges of naval warfare, on the sea, on the ground, and in the air. Our focus is on tradition. It's how we've always done it." Musk nodded slowly. He didn't need to ask any further. The lack of emphasis on the digital realm was a glaring issue. The reality was clear. While the Navy had been an unstoppable force in past wars, it was failing to prepare the next generation for the battles of the future. What was missing? A deep integration of technology into their strategy and training, as eyes. Musk continued his tour. It became increasingly apparent that the academy was built on solid traditions, but it was also marred by a reluctance to embrace anything that deviated from the norm. In classrooms, cadets were still being taught naval tactics developed decades ago, and there was an evident lack of modern tools to simulate the complex, high-tech warfare they'd likely face in the coming years. He stopped by one of the simulators, a room designed to recreate naval battle scenarios. The simulator was a relic of the past, clunky and outdated. The interface was unintuitive, the graphics poor, and the scenarios rigid. It felt more like an arcade game from the early 2000s than the cutting-edge technology that Musk was used to in his companies. Musk watched a few cadets struggle through a simulation, failing to make the right decisions in a digital combat scenario. "This is what they're training on," he muttered under his breath. There was a serious gap between what they were learning and what the real world demanded. At the same time, he could see the commitment in the cadets' eyes. They were passionate, eager to serve their country, and they were working hard. But the tools they had were failing them. They had potential, but the system wasn't giving them the resources they needed to thrive in an increasingly digital world. Later, that day, Musk had a conversation with one of the senior faculty members, Admiral James Rutherford, a man who had spent over 30 years in the Navy. Rutherford was skeptical of Musk's vision, but intrigued by his determination. "I've seen many new technologies come and go over the years," Rutherford said, sipping his coffee. "What makes you think this new world you speak of can be integrated into our Navy without tearing apart? Everything we've built." Musk looked at him, his expression unwavering. "Because the future doesn't wait. If you're not ahead of the curve, you're falling behind. And right now, I'm afraid the Navy is behind." Rutherford raised an eyebrow. "What would you have us do? Toss out everything we know and start over?" "No," Musk said, shaking his head. "I'm not asking you to throw away tradition. I'm asking you to combine it with the future. Imagine a Navy where technology isn't just a tool, but a strategic advantage, a force multiplier. I'm talking about AI-guided combat simulations, drone fleets, cyber warfare training, and real-time data analysis. These things should be second nature for the next generation of officers." Rutherford leaned back in his chair, clearly deep in thought. "And you think we can do all that without losing the essence of what it means to be a Navy officer?" "I think it's the only way to preserve it," Musk replied. For a moment there was silence between them. Then Rutherford sighed and leaned forward. "You're asking us to make a leap of faith. It's not an easy thing for an institution like ours to do. Faith doesn't come without risk," Musk said quietly. "But without it, you're stuck in the past. And in war, the past can be your downfall." The following day, Elon Musk met with a small group of the Academy's senior leadership in an effort to push his vision forward. The previous day's encounter with Admiral Rutherford had only fueled his drive. Musk was certain that if he was Going to make a lasting impact, he needed to start with a concrete plan, a radical shift in how the Navy prepared its officers for modern warfare. But to do that, he first needed to convince the decision-makers at the Academy to trust him. The meeting was held in a modest conference room, with thick wooden tables and rows of military officers sitting rigidly, their expressions a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Musk, wearing his usual attire of a black hoodie and jeans, sat confidently. At the front, his eyes alight with the promise of change. "I'm not here to disrupt for the sake of disruption," Musk began, his voice calm but persuasive. "I'm here to integrate technology into the very fabric of how you train and how you fight. The tools you use today will not be enough for the Navy of tomorrow. And I don't think I need to remind anyone here how quickly the world is changing." A few of the officers shifted in their seats. The idea of tech mogul Elon Musk coming in to overhaul the military system was, to say the least, unsettling. But Musk was used to shaking up industries, and he knew that challenging the status quo was never easy. "Think about it this way," Musk continued, pacing slowly around the room. "When you think of a modern war, what comes to mind? Battleships clashing, aircraft carriers launching. It's all part of the picture, but increasingly, it's about data. It's about AI. It's about algorithms predicting the next move before the enemy even makes it. And it's about integrating autonomous systems that don't rely on human error." One officer, Captain Mark Stanton, raised a hand. "I'm still not sure what you're getting at. What exactly do you want to change?" "Here," Musk smiled. "Let's start with simulations. These cadets have the potential to be incredible leaders, but they're not getting the experience they need. Right now, you have old-school simulators, outdated tech that doesn't capture the complexity of modern warfare. What if we integrate AI-driven simulations that can adapt to any real-world scenario? A fleet of autonomous drones, real-time decision-making challenges, training cadets to think on their feet while dealing with multiple variables, from cyber attacks to rogue AI." Stanton frowned, not quite convinced. "That sounds like science fiction. We're talking about military leadership here. How does any of that build character or teach the values of honor, courage, and commitment?" Musk paused, sensing the underlying concern. "Character is important, and those values are foundational to who you are as a Navy officer. But the future of war isn't just about who's brave enough to charge into battle. It's about who can make the right decision in real time, when lives are on the line and when there are a million variables, most of which you won't see with the naked eye." He could feel the tension in the room, but he pressed on. "Technology won't replace human judgment. It will enhance it. I'm not asking for the Academy to abandon tradition, but to integrate it with the future. You can't train these cadets for a war that's decades old." The room fell silent as the officers took in what Musk had said. Some were still uneasy, but others were starting to see the merit in his argument. Musk had a way of simplifying complex problems and presenting them in a way that was hard to ignore. It was evident that the Navy needed to evolve if it was going to maintain its dominance. Admiral Rutherford, who had attended the meeting, spoke up. "You're proposing a complete overhaul of our training methods. You're asking us to risk everything we've built." "I'm asking you to evolve," Musk corrected him. "The world isn't waiting for you to catch up. Your cadets are smart, they're capable. But if you give them the right tools and the right mindset, they'll be prepared for anything." Rutherford looked around at the officers in the room, his face betraying uncertainty. But he also saw something in Musk's eyes that he couldn't deny, a level of conviction that could move mountains. "All right, Musk," Rutherford said slowly, his voice measured. "Let's take this one step at a time. I'll agree to a small pilot program, but I want to see results before we go any further." Musk nodded. "That's all I'm asking for. A chance to prove that this works. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, say even when things get tough?" The first step had been taken. It wasn't going to be easy, and it certainly wasn't going to be quick, but Musk had managed to plant the seed of change. Now it was time to put his vision into action. Within the following weeks, Musk worked with his team of engineers, AI specialists, and simulation experts to design a series of high-tech training programs for the Academy. The project was ambitious, with the goal of integrating cutting-edge AI, autonomous systems, and real-time cyber warfare scenarios into the cadets' training. But as Musk began the process of implementing the pilot program, he quickly realized that the resistance to change wasn't just coming from the top. It was pervasive throughout the academy. Some of the cadets, who had grown up steeped in tradition, were hesitant to embrace the new methods. They saw Musk's innovations as a distraction, an attempt to strip away the core values they held dear. Musk knew he had to win them over, but how? How could he make these young officers see the value of what he was offering, especially when they had already been indoctrinated into a way of thinking that seemed invulnerable? It was time to get his hands dirty and work directly with the cadets, to show them that the future was not just a place for tech geniuses, it was a place where military leaders could thrive. Musk knew that if he was going to truly change the culture at the Naval Academy, he needed to connect with the cadets directly. They were the future of the Navy, and if they didn't see the potential in his vision, the pilot program he had launched would be nothing more than a flash in the pan. But there was a deeper issue at play: tradition. The cadets had grown up with a set of values, skills, and expectations that were deeply ingrained. Musk needed to convince them that their future was intertwined with the very technology they resisted. The day he planned to meet with the cadets, Musk stood in front of a large auditorium filled with young men and women, all dressed in their crisp uniforms, their faces eager yet skeptical. The room was filled with energy that Musk was going to tap into. He walked onto the stage with his usual air of quiet confidence, his black hoodie in stark contrast to the formal setting. The sound of chairs shifting, people settling into place, and whispers among the cadets buzzed through the room. Musk took a deep breath, knowing this was a crucial moment. "You're the best of the best," Musk began, his voice carrying through the hall. "You've been selected for this academy because of your abilities, your drive, your potential. But if you want to stay ahead in the world that's coming, you need to be ready to evolve. And that means embracing change." He paused, watching the cadets' faces closely, gauging their reactions. Some nodded slowly, but many were still apprehensive. Musk had seen this before. Resistance to new ideas was natural, especially when it came to breaking long-standing traditions. But he had a mission, and that mission was bigger than any individual fear or doubt. "Let me be clear," Musk continued. "I'm not here to tell you that what you've learned so far isn't important. Far from it. You need discipline, leadership, honor, and courage. That's what makes the Navy the strongest force in the world. But those qualities, those values, need to coexist with the technologies that will shape the future of warfare. Artificial intelligence, drones, autonomous ships, cyber defense, these aren't optional anymore. They are the future, and you need to be prepared for it." A cadet in the front row raised his hand. "But how does any of that translate to leadership? When we're out there in the field, the decisions we make can mean life or death. How does a drone or an algorithm help us with that?" Musk smiled, glad for the question. "You're right," he said. "Leadership is about making the right decision at the right time, and sometimes those decisions need to be made in seconds. But what if you could make a decision based on data, real-time data that gives you a complete picture of the battlefield? What if you could predict the enemy's movements with pinpoint accuracy? What if you could control a fleet of autonomous ships and the system adapts to your strategy, not the other way around?" He let the question hang in the air, giving them time to think. You've been trained to lead soldiers, to command ships, to think strategically in real-world scenarios. But the real question is, what happens when the battlefield is no longer just physical? What happens when the enemy can attack you from anywhere? Cyber attacks, electronic warfare, AI manipulation. What happens when the weapons you fight with aren't even human? The room was quiet now, the cadets' attention fully captured. Musk knew he had reached them, at least some of them. He continued, leaning into the challenge. "I'm not here to replace you as leaders. I'm here to give you the tools that will allow you to lead in a world that's rapidly changing. You'll still make the decisions, but those decisions will be supported by technology that can give you the upper hand. The Navy's future depends on your ability to adapt. So, are you ready to take that leap?" There was a long pause, the cadets exchanging glances. Then slowly, one by one, they began to nod. A cadet standing near the back of the room stood up. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice steady. "How do we get started?" Musk smiled, knowing this was the moment that would set the stage for everything to come. "You're going to train differently. Starting today, you'll be introduced to new systems, simulations that adapt to your decisions, real-time data analysis, and even AI-driven strategies. But it's not going to be easy. It will push you to your limits and you may fail along the way. But that's how we learn. Failure is part of the process. The future of warfare will demand more than physical strength and courage. It will demand mental agility and the ability to use every tool at your disposal. Are you ready for that?" The cadets exchanged looks again, but this time there was a sense of determination in the air. They weren't just agreeing out of obligation, they were ready for the challenge. As the cadets filed out of the auditorium, there was a palpable shift in the atmosphere. Musk could sense it. These young men and women were no longer simply resisting the idea of change. They were curious, they were eager. They were ready to see what the future held. The first day of the pilot program was set to begin the next week. The systems Musk had put in place were sophisticated and ambitious. Autonomous drones, AI-assisted battlefield simulations, cyber attack, scenarios. They were all integrated into a comprehensive training environment. But the real test would be whether the cadets could rise to the challenge. As Musk left the building that afternoon, he felt a sense of accomplishment. The hard work was still ahead, but there was now a real chance that his vision for the future of the Navy would come to fruition. The Academy had taken the first step into a new era, but it was up to the cadets, and to him, to ensure it didn't. Stop there. Change was coming, and it would come quickly. The first day of the new training program arrived with a buzz of excitement, anxiety, and curiosity. The cadets had heard about the changes Musk was introducing, but none of them knew exactly what to expect. For many of them, the concept of integrating cutting-edge technology into their training seemed like a foreign idea, something that belonged more to a Silicon Valley tech startup than a prestigious military institution. But Musk wasn't here to play it safe. He wanted to completely transform the way they thought about warfare. The first simulation session began early in the morning, and the cadets gathered in the newly outfitted training room. Instead of the usual classroom setup with old-school projectors and whiteboards, the room was filled with sleek, futuristic screens, each one displaying real-time data feeds, digital maps, and virtual environments. Musk was there to oversee the first round of training. He was on edge. This was the first major test of his plan, and he knew the stakes were high. If the cadets failed to embrace the new system, his vision for the future of the Navy would be in serious jeopardy. The cadets were grouped into teams and given the task of defending a naval base from a simulated cyber attack. As soon as the simulation began, the room transformed. The atmosphere was charged, as if the walls themselves were pulsing with energy. A drone fleet, guided by AI algorithms, had already been dispatched as part of the enemy forces, while the cadets were tasked with defending the base, using a mix of traditional military tactics and digital countermeasures. Musk stood in the corner, watching closely, his arms crossed. He could see the cadets struggling at first. They instinctively tried to use the same tactics they had been taught for years, old methods of warfare that involved direct confrontation rather than leveraging technology to gain an advantage. But the digital battlefield was different. Their drone fleet was being outmaneuvered by an AI system that adapted to their every move. The cyber attacks were relentless and sophisticated, using encryption and AI to hack into their systems faster than they could respond. Musk watched as some cadets tried to fight back, their minds focused on familiar concepts, using physical defenses, brute force. But this was a battle they couldn't win through sheer power alone. The turning point came when one of the cadets, Lieutenant Sarah Brooks, stood up, her expression a mix of frustration and realization. She stepped away from her team's traditional response and took a different approach. She activated a series of counter-cyber measures that Musk had introduced in the simulation, algorithmic defenses that were designed to adapt and learn. The AI that had been attacking the cadets' systems faltered as Brooks's countermeasures began to outpace it. Brooks didn't just fight back. She adapted, she learned, and most importantly, she led her team to victory not through force, but through understanding the technology at her disposal. Musk's eyes lit up as he saw the cadets begin to get the hang of it. They were finally starting to think like he had hoped. They weren't just reacting, they were analyzing the situation, learning from their mistakes, and using technology to enhance their ability to lead and make decisions. The integration of AI into their strategy wasn't just about fighting smarter, it was about preparing them to navigate an uncertain and unpredictable future. By the end of the session, most of the cadets had mastered the basics of the new system. They were no longer just following orders in a traditional sense. They were engaged in dynamic, real-time decision-making, where each move had consequences. Musk could see the change in them, the shift in their mindset. They were no longer skeptical of the new tools. They were using them to their advantage. That evening, Musk gathered with the cadets again for a debriefing session. He could sense their excitement, but there was also a quiet recognition of just how much more they needed to learn. It was a different kind of challenge, one that demanded more mental agility than brute strength. Sarah Brooks, who had led her team to victory earlier, stood up to speak. "This isn't like any training I've ever done. It's not just about being fast or strong. It's about making decisions in the heat of the moment, knowing that the technology will help guide us. But also we have to learn to trust it." Musk nodded. "Exactly. The future of warfare isn't just about being prepared for what you can see. It's about being prepared for what you can't see. And that means embracing technology as a powerful ally, not something to fear." The cadets seemed to absorb his words, their confidence growing. They were beginning to understand what he had been trying to teach them, that leadership in the future would require them to think beyond traditional boundaries. Over the next several weeks, Musk's new training systems were put to the test again and again. Each simulation grew more complex, requiring the cadets to think quickly, adapt to unforeseen circumstances, and make decisions based on data and real-time analysis. The results were impressive. The cadets weren't just learning new technologies, they were learning how to lead in an era of constant technological evolution. However, not everyone was convinced that this was the way forward. Some of the older faculty members, especially those who had been at the academy for decades, remained resistant to Musk's vision. They watched the cadets succeed in the simulations, but they couldn't shake the belief that the traditional methods were more reliable. They worried that relying too heavily on technology would weaken the cadets' ability to make independent decisions in real-world combat situations. One of these faculty members, Commander Samuel Harris, voiced his concerns during a faculty meeting. "I've seen these cadets work through these simulations, and yes, they're fast learners. But what happens when the technology fails in the field? What happens when they're out there on the open seas and there's no AI to rely on? Will they know how to think for themselves, to lead without the crutch of a machine?" Musk listened carefully, his expression unreadable. He knew that the fear of losing human judgment was a valid concern, but he also understood that the world was changing, and the Navy needed to change with it. "The technology doesn't replace their leadership," Musk replied firmly. "It enhances it. The cadets are still making the decisions. They're still leading, but now they're doing so with the most powerful tools available to them. The future of warfare isn't about relying on technology. It's about leveraging her to make better decisions." There was a long silence in the room as the faculty members mulled over his words. Musk wasn't trying to convince them all in one meeting, but he could sense the tide was beginning to turn. Some of them were starting to see the possibilities. Change, Musk knew, wasn't just about creating a new system. It was about getting people to believe in it. And for the first time, it seemed like the Naval Academy was beginning to do just that. The road ahead was still filled with obstacles, but Musk was confident that the future was already in motion. The cadets were ready. The technology was ready. It was now up to the Academy to embrace the change or risk being left behind. Weeks passed, and the atmosphere at the Naval Academy had shifted. The cadets, once skeptical of Musk's new training methods, had become more comfortable with the technology. They began to understand that the future of warfare wasn't just about dominating the physical battlefield. It was about mastering the unseen, the digital and the unpredictable. But the true test was yet to come, a live, real-world simulation that would push them to the limits of their skills, judgment, and the technology they had just begun to master. Musk had been pushing for this ultimate test for months, a live simulation where the cadets would be required to command a fleet of autonomous ships, drones, and AI-assisted vehicles against a simulated enemy force. This wasn't just about tactics. This was about leadership under pressure, decision-making in real time, and trusting the systems that had been integrated into their training. They would face an environment where failure meant more than just losing a game. It meant failing in the real world. The day of the simulation arrived, and the cadets were buzzing with a mixture of excitement and tension. The simulation would be conducted in the Chesapeake Bay, just off the coast of Maryland. Musk, along with Admiral Rutherford and several other senior officials, would be observing from the command center. On the edge of the bay, the cadets assembled, in their respective command units, each one responsible for different aspects of the operation. Some would oversee the autonomous ships, others the aerial drones, and some would monitor the cyber defenses. The enemy force, a series of rogue AI-driven military assets, had been carefully constructed by Musk's team to simulate a full-scale, high-tech assault. As the simulation began, Musk watched intently from the command center. His eyes moved from screen to screen, monitoring the real-time data, watching as the cadets initiated their strategies. The rogue AI force was unpredictable, with algorithms designed to adapt to every move the cadets made. It was like a chess game, but one with stakes higher than any game had ever had before. One of the cadets, Lieutenant Sarah Brooks, had been selected to lead the defense of the fleet. She was calm but clearly focused, her eyes locked onto the monitors in front of her. Her team worked in sync, managing their drones and autonomous ships with precision. The tension was palpable in the command center as each team member communicated their moves, each decision feeding into a greater whole. Then disaster struck. The enemy force launched a sudden, highly coordinated cyber attack, disabling several of the autonomous ships and drones. The AI-controlled enemy seemed to anticipate every move, exploiting weaknesses in the defense strategies. Brooks's team was taken by surprise, and it quickly became clear that they were on the verge of losing the battle. The rogue AI had learned how to neutralize their defenses in real time, striking with surgical precision. Musk watched, his expression neutral, but inside, his mind was racing. This was the moment, the test of whether the cadets could rise above the challenge. They had been trained to face the unknown, to make decisions when faced with overwhelming odds. But now they had to act fast, relying on the training they had received and the tools at their disposal. Brooks took a deep breath. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. But she didn't panic. She had been taught how to think critically, how to adjust in the face of adversity. She issued a series of commands to her team, directing them to isolate the rogue AI's signal and launch a counterattack. It was a calculated risk, but Brooks trusted the systems in place. She had confidence in the AI-assisted strategy they'd been using, and she knew that if they could outsmart the rogue AI's algorithms, they might still have a chance. Moments later, the tide began to turn. The AI systems controlling the rogue enemy fleet started to glitch. Brooks's countermeasures were beginning to work. As her team re-established control over the drones and ships, they launched a final, coordinated strike against the AI's core systems. It was an all-or-nothing maneuver, and if it failed, their defenses would crumble. Then, just as the clock was ticking down, the rogue AI's systems began to fail, and the enemy fleet went dark. Brooks's team had won. The room erupted into applause. Musk stood up from his seat, nodding approvingly. It had been a hard-fought battle, but it was also a victory that demonstrated the potential of Musk's vision. The cadets had adapted, had led, and had triumphed, relying on both their leadership skills and the technology that had once seemed so foreign to them. Admiral Rutherford, who had been watching from the back of the room, walked over to Musk. "That was impressive," he said, his voice filled with a mix of admiration and astonishment. "You were right. These cadets not only survived, but thrived in a world where technology was the key to success." Musk smiled. It wasn't just the technology. It was the way they used it. They understood that their leadership and decision-making were still at the core of the operation. Technology is a tool, not a crutch. Rutherford nodded. I see that now. But this doesn't mean we're done. We need to refine these systems, improve them, and ensure that they're ready for the real world. But you've made your point. This is the future. Musk looked out at the cadets, who were still celebrating their victory. He felt a sense of satisfaction, but he knew this was only the beginning. There were still many hurdles to overcome, many questions left to answer. But for the first time, the Navy seemed ready to embrace the future. And that in itself was a huge victory. That evening, as the simulation debrief took place, Musk sat quietly among the cadets, watching them share their experiences. They were excited but thoughtful, recognizing that their success had been as much about collaboration and trust in their teammates as it was about the tools they had at their disposal. This new era of warfare wasn't about one person's strength, but about the collective power of human intelligence combined with the capabilities of technology. But while Musk had succeeded in winning over the cadets, there were still lingering doubts among some of the senior officers at the academy. They had seen the results, but they weren't convinced that the training system was foolproof. They worried about the potential for failure in a real-world scenario. Musk knew that the road ahead would be long and that these doubts weren't going to disappear overnight, but he was more determined than ever. The future of the Navy had begun to change, and Musk had no intention of letting it stop now. Despite the success of the simulation, not everyone at the Naval Academy was convinced. The technology was evolving, and the cadets were adapting to the new training methods. But deep down, Musk knew that the real challenge lay not in teaching the cadets to use the tools, but in shifting the mindset of the people who had been entrenched in traditional military practices for decades. It was the senior leadership, the ones with decades of experience, who were the true obstacle. In the weeks following the live simulation, Musk noticed an increasing sense of resistance among some of the faculty members. Commander Samuel Harris, a staunch advocate for traditional methods, had grown even more vocal in his opposition. While the cadets were starting to embrace the future, Harris and a few others believed that technology would ultimately make them weaker, not stronger. During a faculty meeting, Harris spoke out once again. "We can't rely on machines to do the thinking for us," he said, his voice filled with frustration. "There's no substitute for human judgment in the heat of battle. We've trained these cadets to think and act, not just follow algorithms and trust AI to make decisions for them." Musk leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Harris. "It's not about replacing human judgment, Commander. It's about augmenting it. In warfare, when seconds matter and lives are on the line, technology can give you the edge that you need. If we continue to ignore these advancements, we risk falling behind. The enemy will use technology to outsmart us, and we'll be left playing catch-up." Harris shook his head. "You're too focused on the future. You're forgetting about the past. Our success in battle wasn't built on AI or algorithms. It was built on grit, experience, and leadership. These cadets need to understand that." Musk knew that he couldn't change Harris's mind overnight, but the disagreement left him with a sense of urgency. He needed to show the leadership of the academy and the military as a whole that the future wasn't just an option, it was inevitable. And for the Navy to remain at the forefront of global military power, they had to adapt, even if it meant confronting their deepest-held beliefs. The next step in Musk's plan was a demonstration, something that would put the technology to the ultimate test under the harshest conditions. It was late one evening when Musk received a call from Admiral Rutherford. "Elon, we've got an opportunity for a real-world test. A group of rogue ships has been spotted off the coast of Maryland, engaging in suspicious activity. We've been asked to intervene, and it seems like a perfect chance to showcase the cadets' new training." Musk's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the real-world test that could either prove his vision or expose its weaknesses. The cadets had been trained in simulations, but now they would face a live threat with real stakes and real consequences. "Do we have a full task force ready?" Musk asked, his mind already racing through the logistics. "No," Rutherford replied, his tone grim. "We've been told to act fast, and the only units available are the cadets. They'll be using the same autonomous ships and drones we've been training them on. There won't be any backup. Musk understood the gravity of the situation. The cadets had no real-world combat experience, and the stakes were much higher than in any simulation. It would be a test not only of their technical skills, but also of their ability to think on their feet and work together under pressure. "I'm in," Musk said, his voice firm. "We'll deploy the cadets. Let's see if they're ready." The operation began at dawn the next day. The cadets, still recovering from the previous week's simulation, now found themselves in the middle of a real mission. They were briefed quickly. There was a fleet of rogue ships, potentially armed, with illegal weapons, operating just outside of U.S. waters. The Navy had to move in swiftly and neutralize the threat before it escalated. Musk, along with Admiral Rutherford and the rest of the senior officers, watched from the command center as the cadets launched their drones and autonomous ships. The plan was simple: move in fast, disable the rogue fleet's engines, and capture the ships without causing casualties. But what the cadets didn't know was that the rogue ships had also been equipped with advanced AI systems designed to counteract their moves. As soon as the cadets' forces made contact with the rogue fleet, things went sideways. The enemy ships were equipped with jamming devices that disabled the cadets' communications and some of their autonomous systems. The rogue fleet counterattacked with an impressive amount of firepower, catching the cadets off guard. It wasn't a battle of drones and algorithms anymore. It was a battle of sheer willpower and adaptability. Lieutenant Sarah Brooks, who had been leading the defense in the earlier simulation, found herself in the thick of it again. The AI systems she had relied on had been hacked, leaving her without the tactical advantages she was used to. For the first time, she could hear the real sounds of combat, the hum of drones, the roar of engines, the distant blasts of enemy. "Fire, Lieutenant Brooks! We're losing control of the fleet!" One of her subordinates shouted over the comms, his voice filled with panic. Brooks steadied herself. She had been trained for this, at least in theory. She could feel the weight of the responsibility, but she refused to let it overwhelm her. She looked over the data streams, trying to find a pattern, a weakness in the enemy's system. In the midst of the chaos, she spotted it. The rogue AI was using a predictive algorithm to anticipate the cadets' movements, but there was one flaw. It could only predict a certain range of actions. It was a machine, and machines had limits. "All units, listen up," Brooks said, her voice calm but commanding. "We're going to break the pattern, disengage from the current tactics and move unpredictably. Let's make them guess our next move." The cadets hesitated at first, but they trusted her. They shifted their tactics, launching a barrage of unpredictable maneuvers that confused the enemy AI. Slowly, they gained the upper hand. The rogue fleet began to fall apart under the relentless assault. By the time the mission ended, the rogue fleet had been neutralized, and the cadets had emerged victorious, albeit with a few close calls. They had proven themselves in the real world, not just in simulations. They had faced an enemy that adapted as quickly as they did, and they had prevailed. Musk watched the entire operation from the command center, his heart racing. He knew that the victory had been hard-earned, but it was exactly what he needed. The cadets had proven that they could think for themselves, adapt to unexpected situations, and use technology to their advantage. Admiral Rutherford approached, him a look of respect on his face. "I have to admit, Elon, I wasn't sure about all this, but today you proved me wrong. The future is here, and the Navy is ready for it." Musk nodded, but he wasn't celebrating yet. The battle had been won, but there were still plenty of challenges ahead. He had made his point, but the road to full acceptance of his vision was still long. However, for the first time, it seemed like the tide was turning in his favor. Musk stood silently, watching as the cadets celebrated their victory, knowing that this was just the beginning. The future had been tested, and now it was time to shape it. The Navy would never be the same again. The victory over the rogue fleet had left a lingering sense of accomplishment, but it also stirred a storm of doubts that Musk could feel swirling beneath the surface, both within the academy and throughout the broader military community. While the cadets had proven themselves in battle, there were still whispers in the corridors of power. In the weeks following the mission, Musk's presence at the Naval Academy became increasingly controversial. His technology had delivered results, undeniably so, but not everyone was ready to embrace it as the future of warfare. Some were grateful for the success, others were deeply unsettled. Many traditionalists feared that the blending of technology and military leadership was a dangerous step into uncharted territory. If they relied too much on machines, would the very essence of what made a soldier or a leader become obsolete? As Musk sat in the command center one morning, reviewing the after-action reports from the Rogue Fleet mission, Admiral Rutherford joined him. His expression was grim. "Elon, I'm afraid the storm isn't over," Rutherford said, sitting across from Musk, the weight of his words sinking in. "There's growing pressure from the higher-ups. Some of the top brass are questioning the results of the mission. They're calling it a fluke. Others believe that while the cadets performed well, they still don't have the experience to lead in a real-world conflict." Musk leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly against the table. "They think the cadets were lucky? Some do. Others think we're playing with fire by letting technology take such a central role in military operations. They see it as a risk. If we become too reliant on machines and AI, what happens if those systems fail? Or worse, what happens if our adversaries outpace us in this technology?" Musk felt the sting of these doubts, but they didn't deter him. In fact, they fueled him. "The question isn't whether technology could fail, it's whether we can fail without it. We're in a new era, Admiral. If we keep clinging to the past, we'll be left behind." Rutherford nodded slowly, but his face betrayed his own internal struggle. "I'm with you, Elon, but we need to show them, prove to them, that this is more than just theory, that the cadets can lead without just following algorithms." Musk thought for a moment. The pressure was mounting, but he knew that he couldn't back down now. "I agree," he said, his voice steady. "We need to give them something more. We need to show not just that they can follow the technology, but that they can innovate, think on their feet and lead with it." The Admiral stood up, his mind clearly racing through the options. "What are you thinking?" Musk's eyes narrowed, and he began to formulate a new challenge, one that would make all the difference. A live combat scenario, but this time with no automation, no drones, no AI-assisted vehicles, just the cadets, leading in the field with nothing but their wits, training, and the skills we've taught them. Rutherford's eyes widened. "Elon, that's risky. You're asking them to go into a live mission without their technological safety net." "I'm asking them to prove they can lead, not just follow. They've been trained to use technology, but now they need to prove they can lead without it. We'll give them a traditional operation, a real mission, but they'll have to rely on their instincts and leadership. It'll be a true test of their character and their ability to think independently. I want to see if they can command without relying on a machine to tell them what to do." The decision was made. In the coming days, the cadets were briefed on the mission, an operation that would take them into an international waters hotspot where a pirate faction had been harassing commercial shipping lanes. This time, however, there was no tech intervention. The mission would be old school: direct action, tactical decision-making, and leadership in the field. No drones, no robots, no AI. Sarah Brooks, now a leader among the cadets, couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had come to rely on the cutting-edge technology that had been integrated into her training. It was hard to imagine going into the field without the drones, the autonomous ships, or the AI-powered strategies that had helped them succeed. "What do you think, Sarah?" One of her fellow cadets, Lieutenant Jack Rivera, asked her as they prepared for the mission. His voice was tinged with uncertainty. "We've never done anything like this before. What if we mess up?" She paused, looking at the briefing notes in her hands. She had trained for this, really trained. Her skills in strategy, leadership, and decision-making had been honed, but the safety net of technology was no longer there. The pressure was on, and it wasn't just about the mission anymore. It was about proving to themselves and to the world that they could lead with nothing but their wits and their training. "We can do this," she said, her voice firm. "We've been preparing for this moment. We just have to remember what we've learned." The mission began with a sense of quiet tension. The cadets were deployed aboard traditional Navy ships, ready to face the pirates. They had no advanced AI-guided systems to track the pirates' movements. There was no digital map to guide them. They had to rely on their own instincts, and it felt like stepping into the unknown. As they approached the pirate territory, Brooks, now in command of a small fleet of ships, called for a strategic meeting. Her team was tense. This was unlike anything they had faced before. There was no virtual opponent to outsmart, no simulated threats to neutralize. The pirates would be real. The danger was real. "We need to stay calm," Brooks said, standing before her team. "We've been trained for this. Trust your training and trust each other. We'll move in, neutralize the threat, and protect the shipping lanes." The tension was high as they approached the pirate ships which appeared on their radar. Brooks's heart raced. This was it, the moment of truth. As they closed in, the pirates opened fire and a battle ensued. The cadets were under heavy fire, but they moved with purpose, utilizing the skills they had learned, from coordinating their tactics to staying calm under pressure. For the first time, they understood what it meant to lead without relying on technology. Brooks had to think on her feet. She adjusted the formation of her fleet to outflank the pirates, directing her crew with precision. Every move had to be calculated, and there was no room for error. Minutes felt like hours as the cadets maneuvered through the chaos, finally subduing the pirates and securing the shipping lanes. The mission was a success, but it had come at a cost. Several cadets had been injured, and their ships had sustained damage. But in the end, they had proven something far more important. They had proven that they could lead, think critically, and survive without the luxury of technology's backup. Musk stood in the command center, watching as the mission concluded. For a moment he didn't speak, letting the gravity of the moment settle in. These cadets had stepped up, proving not just their technical abilities but their character as leaders. The storm of doubt had not yet fully passed, but it had begun to break. The future had been tested, and it was clear. The cadets and the new Navy were ready. The sun had barely risen over the Naval Academy, casting a soft golden glow on the campus as Musk stood by the window of his office, staring out at the Academy's iconic buildings. The events of the past few months had set a course for change that no one could undo. The rogue fleet battle had proven the cadets' mettle. The pirate mission had solidified their leadership skills, and now Musk knew that a shift had occurred. Both, within the Academy and within himself. The storm of doubt, though still lingering in the shadows of some minds, had begun to dissipate. The proof was in the cadets. They had faced every challenge head-on, without the comfort of advanced technology, and they had excelled. What was once seen as a leap of faith had now become the cornerstone of a new way forward. The Navy was no longer just a symbol of tradition. It was becoming a living embodiment of innovation and adaptability. Yet Musk knew that the fight was far from over. It wasn't just about changing technology. It was about changing hearts and minds, convincing a deeply entrenched military establishment that the future wasn't something to fear but something to embrace. As much as he had pushed the boundaries, he knew that real transformation came in waves, and the ripples from the decisions made in the Academy would take years to fully unfold. That morning, Musk was scheduled to meet with a special board of senior officers and military leadership. The meeting had been arranged by Admiral Rutherford, who had become a staunch ally in Musk's vision. But as he walked into the conference room, Musk sensed the weight of the moment. This was the final step, the one that could either solidify the new direction or dismantle everything he had worked for. The room fell silent as Musk entered, the collective gaze of the board focused on him. Admiral Rutherford nodded to him in acknowledgement as he made his way to the front. The members of the board were a mix of older, experienced officers, many of whom had been in service for decades, and younger officers who had embraced the technological revolution Musk had ushered in. A tall, weathered man with graying hair, Admiral William Harris, stood and addressed Musk. His reputation as a staunch traditionalist preceded him. "Elon," Harris said, his voice deep and measured, "you've proven that the cadets have the potential to lead, even in a combat situation. But what we need to ask ourselves is this: have we really transformed the Navy, or have we just created a version of it with more shiny tools?" Musk's jaw tightened slightly, but he maintained his calm demeanor. "We've done more than just add tools, Admiral. We've shifted the way we think. These cadets aren't just reacting to technology, they're leading with it. We've trained them not to rely on technology alone, but to use it as a tool for making smarter, faster decisions. In a world where warfare is evolving rapidly, we can't afford to hold on to old methods simply because they're familiar. Harris narrowed his eyes, clearly unconvinced. The Navy was built on honor, tradition, and leadership, Musk. You've introduced innovation, yes, but at what cost? We've seen the cadets succeed, but that doesn't mean the future is fully within our grasp. What happens when the technology fails, or worse, when an adversary develops something we haven't anticipated? You're betting the future of the Navy on a set of assumptions. Musk leaned forward, his voice steady but intense. I'm not betting on assumptions, Admiral. I'm betting on adaptability. The enemy isn't going to wait for us to catch up. They're innovating every day. If we remain stagnant, we'll lose the edge. But if we embrace technology, if we teach our future leaders to think critically, to use technology, and to act decisively, we can stay ahead. The cadets proved that. It's no longer about having the better weapons, it's about having the better minds. For a moment, there was a heavy silence in the room. The tension was palpable, each officer weighing Musk's words carefully. Finally, Admiral Rutherford broke the silence. I think the question has already been answered, Rutherford said, his voice carrying authority. We can't deny that the cadets succeeded in missions that many of us wouldn't have thought possible with traditional methods, and they did so because they used the tools we've given them. More importantly, they used their own initiative, their leadership. Musk allowed himself a brief moment of relief. He knew that this wasn't a unanimous decision yet, but the tide was turning. More and more of the board members were nodding in agreement. They couldn't deny the success, and the reality was inescapable. Change was happening whether they embraced it or not. Admiral Harris remained quiet for a long time before finally speaking again, this time with a hint of resignation. I still have my doubts about the path we're on, Musk, but for better or worse, I see your point. The Navy, like the rest of the world, will have to change. Musk felt the weight of Harris's words. The battle for acceptance wasn't over, but the first victory had been won. The future of the Navy, and perhaps the future of warfare itself, was no longer just a dream. It was a reality that was taking shape before their eyes. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. There was agreement on the next steps, a broader initiative to integrate more advanced technologies into military training, further simulations, and additional live combat exercises to refine their strategies. But Musk's mind was already working ahead. He had come to the academy with a vision, and now he knew that it was no longer just his vision. It had become something bigger. As the meeting adjourned and the members began to file out, Rutherford stayed behind. He smiled at Musk. You did it, Elon, the Admiral said, clapping him on the back. You changed their minds. Musk gave a wry smile, looking out the window toward the academy. It's not over yet. We've just taken the first step. There's still a lot of work to do, but we've laid the groundwork for something big. Later that day, as Musk boarded a private jet to return to California, he took a moment to reflect on how far he'd come. He had faced resistance from every corner, traditionalists who were reluctant to embrace the future, skeptics who doubted his ability to lead, and even his own self-doubts that had crept in at moments of uncertainty. But in the end, the work had spoken for itself. The Navy was different now. The cadets were different now, and most importantly, Musk was different now too. He had set out to change the world. Now he could see the first signs of that change unfolding. The future had arrived, and it had begun in the halls of the Naval Academy. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?